Many people found the book of Revelation is something that's so mysterious that they're so afraid of actually reading the book itself, because a lot of symbols and codes and stuff like this that really baffle our minds. So what I did was I did a lot of extensive research into making sure that some of the things that we read are being made more palatable by bringing in history and culture into it, so that you can understand what was going on and then what are those symbols represent, so that it is no longer um, mystery for all when we read the book of Revelation. So a warning: this study is based on the holistic approach towards understanding Revelation. So it's not just a spiritual book. I am approaching this from spiritual, historical, archaeological, academical, psychological um, perspectives, and so it's giving the whole holistic perspective that give you that to make it more comprehensible. Because if we just read it from the spiritual perspective, we can get lost with this, because there's a lot of perspective, a lot of theories to just spiritual. So to understand the Bible needs to be understood from these five contexts. Firstly, cultural context of the day, what's going on, the dress that they wore, the food that they take. All these are all part of the cultural context. A historical backdrop. For instance, in the time of Jesus, Israel was a colony of Roman, and so you have to look into the Roman Empire to understand the history behind what was going on in that time. It's just like to understand my parents or my grandparents' day in Singapore when we were a colony of uh, uh, the World War II in Japan under the Japanese. So we have to understand what was going through that, and during those time when they talk about the history of the Japanese occupation, so they bring back those history, and we have to understand the backdrop of it. Otherwise, it makes no sense to us to tell us that, oh, those banana leaf money and all that. It doesn't make sense to us. But if we understand, okay, those are the contexts based on the historical backdrop of during the time, then we understand the history. So the reason behind the writing of the Bible or in the books, there are always reasons. We need to understand why they were written. For instance, the reason for writing the book of Revelation, John had that impression, had that rhema. All of a sudden, the Spirit of God came and spoke to him to write, to warn the seven churches, and to some they warned the seven churches, and to others the Spirit of God wanting to encourage them to stand firm and not swayed by their current plight. And also we need to look into the personalities of the authors. So Paul is very different from John. John is very different from James. And so you got to look into the personalities, the way we perceive God, as I mentioned yesterday on the first day of this lesson. The way we perceive God result in our calling, in our service rendered to him and to the people of God. For instance, we see God as a judge, then it resulted many to become an evangelist. So we have that sense of urgency that, hey, you will be judged by God, and you got to come and believe in Jesus Christ. Otherwise, you will be condemned to hell for eternity. And those who see God as a loving Father, someone who's graceful and all that, our service is maybe more towards pastoral. We care for God's sheep and all that. So we have to understand the personality, and we will continue to understand John's personality as well as we continue to study from this book. So there are spiritual undertaking, obviously, and then there are theological truth that we need to understand from it. So if we see these five factors that we need to understand the Bible from: cultural, historical reasons, individual perspectives and personalities, spiritual and theological. So I actually spell the name Christ. So I use these five ways to actually read the Bible and understand the context of the Bible, and do my teaching based on these five things that I measure the Bible, or I read the Bible based on. So some people said I teach and preach a little different from others. It's because I try to look into, before I preach and before I prepare the lessons, I try to look into the cultural context, his historical backdrop, the reason behind writing those, the psychology of the author, and the spiritual undertaking and the theological truth. And these are the things that I look into before I start my lesson preparation or my sermon preparation. So there is no different from this book called the Book of Revelation. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you're able to learn something of it. Something that said you may not agree with, that's fine. It's okay not to agree with me. We can agree to disagree as long as you don't throw stone at me. Okay. so was, I so I was told about this. I thought it was fascinating. If every alphabet has a number attached to it, for instance, A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, D is 4, E is 5, F is 6, and then G is something else and all that. So if every letter has a number to it, then the word corona, then let's look into the word corona, okay? C is 3, O is 15, R is 18, O is 15 again, N is 14, A is 1. You know what? They add up to 66. And the word corona has 6 letters. And so 66 and 6, you have 666. And so is this the Antichrist that we are looking at and all that? Is this going to be the end of the world? Well, there's a lot of theories out there, so we will not get so caught up with this. I think the best way to prepare for Christ's coming is to live right, is to know that our life is right with God. So anytime when God comes back, we are ready. We are not caught wanting and caught unprepared about the coming of Christ. So let's continue our lesson. Yesterday we stopped at knowing who wrote the book of Revelation, where it was written, when it was written, why it was written, and how it was written. And I mentioned a little bit about this in Revelation chapter 1. It was the Lord's day, and I was worshiping in the Spirit. Suddenly, I heard from behind me a loud voice with a trumpet blast. So it's like it was a Lord's day. It could be a Sunday, that it could be a day that He dedicated to be a worship day. And then suddenly, it inferred that He had no time to do research about what He was going to write. Okay, assuming that this was what he wrote was true, suddenly he had this impression that he should be writing letters to the 7 churches. So he said, write in the book everything you see and send it to the 7 churches in the cities of Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamon, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. So in first spontaneous writing with no time for research, I had the luxury of time to do this preparation, and I have also the privilege of having the internet and google.com to read into what others are writing about this, and also go into the history books and stuff like this. I have time to prepare for my lesson, but it seems that John doesn't have that. He don't seem to have that like what we have, internet and all that to do the research. So bear in mind that this was written like spontaneously. Now, in the world of psychiatry and psychology, people, when these scientists look and read the book of Revelation, some of them accuse John as suffering from delusionment or having hallucination based on his writing. Suddenly, I have this impression, and for him to write these letters, but then the letter that he wrote to every city was spot on. And today, when we start looking into the city of Ephesus and Smyrna, we will then look into how accurate and spot on John was. He was stranded in an island. He was away from everybody else, but whatever he wrote about what was going on in the cities that he wrote was so spot on. And historians and archaeologists have now dug up certain information about those cities during the time of John, and it was so spot on that he certainly wasn't hallucinating or were delusion at that point of time. So when I turned to see who was speaking to me, I saw 7 gold lampstands. Remember the 7, the number 7 that he's always referring to. And standing in the middle of the lampstand was someone like the Son of Man. He was wearing a long robe with a long sash across his chest. So apparently he saw Jesus, someone like, that looked like Jesus. He wasn't very sure. He said, someone like the Son of Man. His hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like flames of fire. Now, yesterday we talked about John, his progression from fisherman, a rough, tough, aggressive guy, to someone who called himself an apostle of love. He called himself the disciple that Jesus loved. 5 times he wrote that. And then now when he wrote to the book to the churches, the aggression seems to return. His head, he said Jesus' head and his hair were white like wool, and his white and as white as snow, and his eyes were like flames of fire. When we see pictures and portraits and of Jesus, they always painted Jesus with eyes that's so mesmerizing. But John saw Jesus' eyes as something that's fiery, that is like it represent anger. Now, remember, yesterday I talked about John being aggrieved with the Romans because his own brother were tortured and then were killed savagely, and his friends, his colleagues in the faith were all martyred, and he was left alone. And so he was possibly still reeling with that anger, and then he is also being put in an island all by himself. You can see the tone now in his words. He says Jesus' feet were like polished bronze, refined in a furnace, and his voice thundered like mighty ocean waves. It's no longer that loving Jesus who cares for you. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, and whosoever believe in him will have eternal life. And then John 3:16 says, this is what love is. We sacrifice ourselves for one another. Now he described Jesus as someone as coming in like a vengeance towards perhaps the Romans. Now you have to understand that during the time of John, he survived through all that was happening during the Roman time. Firstly, he saw his brother Peter and all his other colleagues been martyred and were killed by the Romans. It's a painful thing to actually witness this. People that you live with for 3.5 years, you talk, you live, eat together, and then you believe in that God, that Jesus, who claimed to be Son of God, and we all believe in that. And all of a sudden, the Romans came and killed all of them except himself. And also, in 70 AD, the Romans came in and destroyed the Jerusalem temple, just as Jesus would have predicted. Now, this is the hub of religious activity, and when they came in and destroyed the Jewish temple, it actually broke the hearts of many of the Jews, because it's like a cultural thing, right? If you break something has that cultural value to your race, to your country, and all that, it's like you lose something. And also strangely in 79 AD, that John was still alive. There was this city called Pompeii, and Pompeii had this volcano eruption. Now it seems that he may link this to what he was writing. There was this loud thundering voice, there's a furnace and all that. Um, Pompeii is part of Italy, part of Roman Empire and all that, and many thousands of people were killed. And you can watch this video online, but let me just show a bit of clips in this about. So history has recorded about this volcano eruption in Pompeii, one of the most devastating volcano eruptions. In fact, the people of Rome then was worshipping an idol called Vulcan. And when this volcano, Vulcan means fire god, and when the volcano eruption happened, and then therefore they attribute that to the fire god, and that's why we have the word volcano. Now, John continued to write that he held 7 stars in his right hand and a sharp two-edged sword coming from his mouth, and his face was like sun in all its brilliance. But it's not that gentle, loving God that he wrote about in all his epistles. Suddenly, God is that fierce-looking, fiery, fire-breathing, sword breathing out from his mouth and all that. It's certainly something about his character. As a psychologist, I'm reading it from the psychological perspective. So if you don't agree with me, that's fine. Remember 7 stars, it was referenced many times here. It means complete. And remember, yesterday we talked about Domitian, the emperor. Then, during the time when John wrote the book of Revelation, he was an evil, terrible Caesar, and he reigned from 1881 to 96. And yesterday we showed you the coin where that was distributed during this time. Domitian made coins, and one of those coins that he made was his son sitting in the universe. It's like Domitian is the God, and his son is the son of God, and he has 7 stars that surround it. Remember the 7 stars that he's been talking about. So John, it apparent that John may be talking about the fake God that is now evident in his time, and that he wants to point to them that there is a real God. He's the Son of God, the Son of Man, and he's the Master of the universe. He's God, and 7 stars are and the 7 lampstands are there, and things like that. So he's comparing perhaps the real God to the fake one that was evident, that was going on in those days. Domitian face is on one side of flip side of the coin, and on the back side of this coin, it shows a beast with babies, children, human, maybe sucking milk out of it, but nobody can understand what this beast was. But John make mention many times about the beast, and also this coin where Domitian is riding on a great white horse. And John also made mention that Jesus is coming back sitting on the great white horse. Are these references too much? To me, there's a lot of coincidence. And today, when we start looking at the 7 churches, you'll see that I will bring out a lot of coincidences in the things that he wrote. Now, according to this history book, a commentary of the 53 book of the Deus Cassius Roman history, it was written by a Roman statesman and a historian of Greek origin. He said that in this history book, he says that Domitian, even insisted upon being regarded as a god, theos in Greek, and took vast pride in being called master, despotus, and god, theos. These titles were used not merely in speech, but also in written documents. So Domitian has this delusion that he is God, and he insisted that everybody, will proclaim that he is God. He even had temples built in his name while he was alive. So that means while he was alive, he built temples and had people to worship him in those temples. I'm going to show you some remnants of the temples of Domitian. Now, this is the palace of Domitian, and right at the gate of the palace was this man sitting, riding on the great white horse, this huge monument that is Domitian himself sitting on that great white horse. And this is where it is now today. Of course, time has taken its toll, and things have been destroyed. What the horse was actually right there in the park, in the middle of it, a huge sculpture, a huge monument of Domitian riding that great white horse. Could it be that John was referring to this and said that Jesus is the one that's coming back in the great white horse, and this guy is a fake? He pretend to be God. He want people to call him God, but we know that there's a God who has this 7 lampstands that's around him, and there's a God that's coming back for us, that's sitting on the right hand of throne of God. If we understand all these historical factors and all that, we can understand a little bit more about the writing of John. So write down what you have seen, both the things that are now happening and the things that will happen. Okay, what you have seen and that is now happening, and what that will happen. Obviously, when John wrote, he think that the things that's going to happen is going to happen in his lifetime. He probably see himself like one of the prophets that was caught up, Elijah, who was caught up in, to heaven, or even Enoch. He would, I assume that he didn't write it down. I'm making this assumption. I can be so very wrong in this, but he assumed that God is going to come back for them in his lifetime. So this is the meaning of the mystery of the seven stars you saw in my right hand, and the seven gold lampstands. The lampstands, the seven stars are the angels of the seven churches, and the seven lampstands are the seven churches. So he make reference to a lot of 777, because this coin that we talk about, this guy puts seven stars surrounding his son and proclaiming that he's God, his son is the son of God. And so there are seven churches here. The seven churches are found in Asia Minor. Right now it's modern day Turkey, towards the coastal area of Turkey and Asia Minor. Patmos is right in the corner here. And he wrote these letters, and apparently there were postmen who would come and pick up his letters and send it to these churches on his behalf. And therefore, these postmen are Roman employees. And so though he may be speaking against the Caesar, against the emperor of the day, against Domitian, he would then wrote it down in quote, rather than to mention that Domitian is the Antichrist and all that. So he wrote in quote, so that those Roman soldier that will read his, first vet his letters, will not see that he is writing about the emperor. And I believe these quotes that he wrote to the Christians would understand what he was trying to put across. So he wrote to the churches based on how the mailman will run, the postman will run. So it's not based on the importance of the cities, because Ephesus would be the first city, because it is the closest city to Patmos. So from Ephesus, it went to Smyrna to Pergamon. Tomorrow we start with Pergamon. Pergamon is an interesting city. You don't want to miss tomorrow, because tomorrow Pergamon is where the seat of Satan is. And I'm going to share some historical, archaeological findings about where this place is. And today it's being rebuilt somewhere in the world. I'm going to tell you where it is tomorrow. And then from Pergamon to Thyatira to Sardis. But Sardis, the people like to eat sardine. That's why they're called Sardis. And to Philadelphia, and then to Laodicea. Now, in the last 10 years, Laodicea, Turkey has allowed archaeologists to come in and dig up Laodicea. And they found so many truths that John was writing. John said, you are rich, but yet you are poor. But then the thing is, when he was writing this, people visited the city. It doesn't show that it's a rich city, a wealthy city, but now with the latest archaeological discovery, it is a wealthy city. It is even more wealthier than Ephesus. And on Friday, we're going to cover that on the church in Laodicea. So there's seven lampstands which represent the seven churches. It could be that the world for Christians were dark, and then the church need to be the lighthouse, need to be the lampstand to shine forth hope to everyone. And John saw that, and therefore he wrote the book of Revelation. Ephesians, the church in Ephesus was written in chapter 2, verses 1 to 7. I mentioned it briefly yesterday, but let's go on to more details. And let's see whether the coincidence in his writing as facts, or he was deluded, and as what most people in my field, the psychiatrists and psychologists, would have diagnosed him with. He said, write this letter to the angel of the church in Ephesus. This is the message from the one who holds the seven stars in his right hand, which represent the seven angels, and the one who walks among the seven gold lampstands, which actually represent the churches. Now, Ephesus is a wealthy city. Its mascot is a honeybee. Even the coin. And remember, if you want to know what's going on in the city and country, look into their dollars, look into their coins, and you see icons in there, and you can find history in this. And so many historians and archaeologists have actually looked into the coins of those cities, and putting them together with what John is writing. He says that this city, the church, is too busy working, and they lost their first love. And the bee was actually in it's the icon, the mascot. In you can see the letter E there. It stands for Ephesus, the city of Ephesus. And you can see that John was in an island. I'm not sure whether he ever visited Ephesus before. He probably would have, but he probably may not know about the coin. I do not know whether he knew it, but the coin actually represent like busy as a bee. Now, it is also the center for learning. It has one of the world biggest library at that time, and it's called Celsius Library. It's, well, it is known as the second largest in the world during the time in the known world then. There's a god called Sophia. They worship a god called Sophia, which means wisdom and knowledge. It has elaborate constructions of buildings, and Sophia was one of the goddess of wisdom that they worship. Now, it's also a transportation center. Now, it's in the coastal city, so basically, it become like a transportation from ships coming into mainland. And so it has the privilege of having a harbor that it had built roads. The roads that was built over 2,000 years ago still stand as compared to some of our roads today. We have potholes. Now you can imagine the craftsmen, the people that during those days when they built things, they made it last till today. Our roads today, you can see some of these potholes everywhere. So it is an entertainment center. So it was, you have this 25,000 seated Coliseum. You know, when you have a Coliseum like this with 25,000 seating and people, entertainment center, you know that it is a wealthy city because not many people can afford such things then. But then when you have such entertainment centers, well, you can actually look into the city and say, well, they're pretty wealthy. It is also a religious center. And here is the remnants of Domitian temple of Domitian. He built a temple while he was alive and he made sure that people in the city worship him. And that could be the reason why John wrote about Domitian, but in quotes. Because Domitian claimed to be God and he has a temple built in his name, in his honor. So he demanded that the people would worship him. So he built this while he was still alive. Can you imagine knowing that, hey, this person claimed to be God, but we know who God is. Jesus Christ, the Son of God who came. He died on the cross. 3 days later, he rose again and all that. But this guy come in because he was an emperor. He made demands of people to worship him and he claimed to be God. Now, it could be, in my hypothesis, it could be that John was running against this guy. And this was the remnants of the temple. So if you go to Turkey today, you visit the seven cities, you will still see the remnants of this temple. Then right at the top there, he built a huge sculpture, a huge statue of himself, and it's still there. And then and the size of it as compared to this woman who is there, you can see that there's a huge, huge statue. Now he says, John wrote this based on the impression that he was given. He says, I know all the things you do. I have seen your hard work and your patient endurance. I know you don't tolerate evil people. You have examined the claims of those who say they are apostles but are not. You have discovered they are liars. In fact, these people are scholars. The Greek word that he used for examine is those scrutinize, to test. It's not an easy city to shepherd, to pastor. Uh, Paul came in, planted a church, and he left, and he made Timothy, young Timothy, to be the pastor of this church. Can you imagine? You are the pastor, and all your flock are professors, doctors, and eminent scholars, and all that. And so let me just mute this person. So these cities are few people who have this critical thinking. They don't take everything per se. So they are intellectual people. And they're also very hardworking people. And so hard work can be a strength and it also can be a weakness. As you all know, when you work too hard, you get too stressed out and you can get burnt out. And they were hardworking people. The thief of intimacy, as we all know, what break most marriages is that we spend too much time at work and too little time at home with our loved ones. And that could be the reason why the church, the people in Ephesus lost their first love. They were too hardworking. They were too into into what they were doing, the scholarly work and the theater and the engineering and construction and all that. They were too heavily involved in this that they lost sight and focus in their faith in God. Basically, they were too busy. Today we have these people call it FOMO. It means fear of missing out. So because we fear of missing out, we make sure that we want to dabble into everything. And they had that since then. The Ephesian Christian did right. He says, I know the things that you do. They stayed right. They were patient. They were patient, and though they were going through some hardship at that point, they taught right. They have tested those that come, but they were too busy working, and they have no time for loving. And what's missing in their life is focus. Focus on putting God first before everything else. So sometimes we get distracted with all the things around us that we got off focus in our side to God. So you can see that the icon of the coin here is a busy bee, a honeybee, but is also represent a busy state of life. And another coin that was found in the city of um, Ephesus is this coin where it has a stallion. Stallion is known to be working, workhorse. We call it workhorse. And so the city is a workhorse. It's a coincidence that he was mentioning this, that you're working too hard and it's causing you to lose focus of your first love to God. See, they were so focusing on building all these beautiful monuments, beautiful libraries, beautiful streets, roads, and stadium and coliseum that they forgot the first love. They lost the first love to God. Sometimes we're too busy looking for the perfect things in life that we probably miss the imperfect people who could actually make us happy, perfectly happy. He says, you have patiently suffered for me without quitting. There were some good things about the church in Ephesus, but I have this complaint against you. You don't love me or each other as you did at first. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. 1 John 3:16 says, we know what real love is because Jesus laid his life for us, so we also ought to lay up our lives for our brothers and sisters. Both verses, John 3:16 and 1 John 3:16, talk about sacrificial love. It's coincidence. I do not know who put that verse to be like that, but it seems like both verses speaks of the same thing. Now you ask people, what is love? Be careful who you ask what is love. According to this book written by three psychiatrists, the general theory of love, three eminent psychiatrists, they try to teach us what love is. But from that scientific perspective, this says our nervous system are not separate or self-contained. Beginning in earliest childhood, the areas of our brain identified as the limbic system, which is the hippocampus, amygdala, anterior thalamic nucleus, and the limbic cortex is affected by those closest to us. There's another is called limbic resonance and synchronizes with then limbic regulation in a way that has profound implications for personality and lifelong emotional health. Whew. Coming from psychiatrists to tell you what is love. So it can be quite complicated, but let me try and put it in graphic so that you can understand it better. Basically, to the scientists and psychiatrists and all that, they see love as chemistry. It's like a chemical reaction. And so once our limbic system is activated and we find that connection with another limbic system. It's like two-person chemistry come together, poof, and then they got locked in. It resonates. It resonates means they agree with one another, then they fall in love. However, as they continue to progress in life, they still love each other, but there are many distractions for the man. Maybe it's work, money, kids, Facebook, mortgages. For the woman, it could be work, money, Facebook, kids, and they're so busy that the chemistry, the two limbic system that was resonating now begin to regulate. It's like it's no longer exciting anymore. Now, over time, if we don't build this chemistry can eventually die. Then it can be disconnected. Some people ask, can I fall out of love Yes, obviously you can. There are people who fall out of love. That's another topic altogether. Says, now look how far you have fallen. Turn back to me and do the works you did at first. If you don't repent, I will come and remove your lampstand from its place among the churches. Say, look how far. And now look where people are looking when they walk in the street. They don't look up anymore, they look down. Look how far you have fallen. Now, sometimes we are so distracted with our own work and all that. We fail to notice what's going on in the world. So, especially in terms of family. The traditional family, maybe a husband and wife, you have their kids, and that's when they go to church together, and God is the center of of their family. Then as they progress, you have a single parent family because of divorce. Now it's more acceptable to have a single parent family and then for them to remarry again. And when they remarry, someone who's already divorced too, then we call this blended family because they bring their children from their previous marriages into this. It's called blended family. And now we are also very acceptable to this. And the children will have identity, of course. Then it goes into young people today. We call them dings, D-I-N-K-S. They get married, but no kids. Right? Dual income, D-I, no kids, N-K-S. Right? So they buy small houses and they don't have children, but they have dogs. So the dogs will have identity. Who am I? Am I a bear? Am I a child? Am I a human? Or am I a dog? And then it progressed to this LGBT family, LGBTQ family, when two same gender people get married. And this has been acceptable now in the first world. You know, it's the choice to get married to one another, but if they adopt a child, and then that will create identity crisis for the child. And in the future, which is now coming in, is already in some places, you have a human robot family. The human being would be marrying robots. Yeah, and they will adopt a child. Can you imagine? We will find one day as pastors, we marry a person with a robot. I hereby pronounce you man and robot. So in Fox News, he says that forecast sex and marriage with robots will be legalized by 2050. Now, all these things are coming in. Now, if we don't look carefully, we get so distracted with our own personal issue and all that. If we fail to see what's going on in the world, we get so caught up and we can be seen as accepting all these values that has now crept into the church, into our world. He says, but this is in your favor. You hate the evil deeds of Nicolaitans, and we're going to come in with the Nicolaitans tomorrow. As I do, they are like another sect of the Christian branches, but they are more like a cult. Anyone with ears to hear must listen to the Spirit and understand what He is saying to the churches. And to everyone who is victorious, I will give fruit from the tree of life in the paradise of God. It's very interesting that he mentioned the tree of life again. The tree of life was mentioned in Genesis, and so you can see a whole returning back to Genesis. So when we look into chapter 5 and onwards, we look into the new world that is to come, and we come back to that world before it was tainted by sin. And Adam was told not to eat from the tree of knowledge and evil, but he took. But then when it comes to the end of the world, everything will go back to revert to where it was. We will come to that maybe next week as we continue the book of Revelation. So tree of life versus the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Adam was told that in the middle of the garden there are two trees. One of those you don't touch, you don't eat the fruit of it, and that's a tree of good and evil. You only take the fruit from the tree of life. Obviously, we know that Adam took the fruit from the good knowledge from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This is where judging comes in because they begin to be the judge and take God out of the equation as judge. So we begin to judge one another as a result of this. I know better. I know what is good. I know what is bad. So I can decide for myself. So it's getting worse today because of this thing called postmodernism ideology that everything I think is right is my right to think that is right. It's not your right to tell me that I'm wrong. And so people begin to be the judge, and as a result of this, love is conditional, acceptance is conditional. So people become stressful. I have to meet up to the expectation of others and meet up to the expectation of people around me. And so when I cannot meet up the expectation, I will be judged. I fail my exam, I will be judged. So shame comes in, depression then sip in, and discouragement and suicides and all this come in, all because we thought we know better as a result of eating from the fruit of knowledge, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And at the end of time, when everything is done with, when Jesus come back for us, we will be rewarded and we will be taking fruits from the tree of life. In the tree of life, there's unconditional love, and we can find rest. We don't have to perform to be accepted. We just have to be who we are. We can find assurance in God, and there's peace, there's gratitude, there's courage. And it's very important for us to know that, because every time you judge another person, you're critical of another person, you are actually taking the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because you're causing that conditional love for that person, that unless you do this, then you will not be accepted. But God is like in the tree of life, we have the acceptance from God in spite of our frailty. And so the tree of life will give life. The tree of knowledge and good and evil will then deplete us of our energy. So basically, the busy bee church here is that we need to know that we have to take into context our life. We can be like the people in Ephesus, that we're so caught up with our work that we lose sight and focus of who God is. So this is the first church that we will look in. Now, let me quickly go into my next presentation slide to go into the church in Ephesus. Okay. Now, I know I have another 15 more minutes to go. I may finish about 11:15. If you need to go, you go. I know I always try to respect your time, but I just have so much to cover in the book, in the church in Ephesus. And so now I'm going to Smyrna. So if you need to go at 11, you have to go, you go, okay? And you can watch this through the recording later. I may finish at 11:15. So if you go, you miss what is after you have went, then you miss all the important parts of the church in Smyrna. All right. So the second church that was mentioned is the church in Smyrna. Smyrna is a very interesting city. Let's look into the context of this and the writing. It found in Revelation chapter 2, verse 8 onwards. It says, to the angel of the church in Smyrna, these are the words of him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life. Many people attribute this to Jesus. Yes, it could be Jesus that he was mentioning. But in the history of Smyrna, there could be something that is making a reference to the city. So if you're a Smyrnian and you receive this letter, the first and the last, who died and come back to life again, there's something that would represent the city that realize that, yes, this letter is actually for us. Let me go into the city and let you, and then we go into that in detail in a while. Smyrna, the city profile is a vibrant commercial hub. It has the first shopping center. These are buildings that were built, and during John's time, there were buildings, and still stand. Can you imagine those buildings that were built thousands of years ago? These were all shopping centers, marketplaces, and all that. It has all these ornaments that was still, the archaeologists actually found here in this city. And today, this city is vibrant. One of the wealthiest cities in Turkey today. Izmir is known as today is known as Izmir in the modern day Turkey. It's a city that died and came to life. Sometimes we reference this to, okay, he may be telling them that Jesus died and came to life, but this was a city that actually died in 6th century. Smyrna was destroyed until 300 years later. Alexander the Great resuscitated the city, and it remained vibrant till today. So it died, it collapsed. And then Alexander the Great came in, rebuilt it, and it remained vibrant till today. According to Aristotle, one of the philosophers, Greek philosophers, he says this about the city. Destruction may be final for men or for other cities, but it is not true for Smyrna. So if you're a citizen of Smyrna, when John wrote, died and came to life again, they know that it was reference to them because the city actually died, but it was revived. He says to the church, to the angel of the church in Smyrna, right? These are the words of him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again. So the city actually died, as I mentioned. Alexander the Great came in 300 years later and revived it. Was it a coincidence? There are too many coincidences that is in John's writing for it to be coincident. It is also a city of many temples, right? At the city has a mountain at the back of it, and then it goes down to the sea. And at the top of the mountain, they built all the temples. As you can see, all the temples, the buildings at the top. These are temples. All the temples, they worship all the idols and all the other gods that they were worshiping and praying to. They were built at the top of the temple. Now, it looks like a crown. They call it the crown of Smyrna. The crown of Smyrna. You can see that it looks like a crown. And the coins, again, wrestled into the coins. Most temples were built, then the coins have this goddess with a crown on her head. You can see that all these coins were found by archaeologists in the city of Smyrna. And this was one of the oldest coins that were found. Now, the crown of Smyrna, has any relevance to John's writing? Well, we will find it. He said the mascot, the crown became their mascot. And John wrote to them, be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life. And so when you are a citizen there and people are going up to the mountain to pray to other gods, and then you are being left alone behind and you're being persecuted and all that, and these are the people who goes up to this place called the crown of Smyrna, and being left out means you are not part of the system there. But Jesus told them, if you are faithful even to the point of death, I will give you the crown of life. You see, then it has some relevance there. They know it was written for them. Again, let me reiterate that John was in an island, stranded in an island. Yet when he wrote this, it was like a sudden thing, a sudden impression, and he was tasked to write this. And he wrote it as spot on and so accurate about the city that the readers would know that it was written to them. What's the coincidence? There are too many coincidences in the letters of in this letter called Revelation that for it to be coincident anymore. It was the first city to build a temple deifying Rome, not the Roman emperor, but to make Rome as a god, the entire country as a god. Can you imagine when Singapore, Malaysia was a colony of Japan, and we built a temple to deify Japan, not the emperor of Japan, but deify Japan as God. So it was the first temple, and so they have this coin, Roma, as the god, the goddess here. Again, you can see this Roma coin that's there, that's found in Smyrna. You can see the S here. It is also the first city to build a temple to worship Tiberius. Tiberius is also another emperor of the Roman Empire, and he built a temple, and some of the remnants are still there. The city were loved by the Romans because they built temples for them, but the Christians were persecuted. Can you imagine? Everybody else, suck up to the Romans except the Christians. And such Christians refused to acknowledge that Caesar is Lord God, and they were persecuted harshly, to which Jesus has 3 encouraging words to the hurting Christian. So he says, I know your affliction and your poverty, yet you are rich. See, they were poor. They were not able to do business with the Romans because they refused to be stamped. Remember yesterday we talked about the mark of the beast. You had to be tattooed in order for you to do business, and they refuse, because when you are tattooed, that means you have to give up your dignity, your rights, your worship of your gods. You must then acknowledge that Rome and the emperor is your god and all that. And so they refuse, and because they refuse, they suffered financially as well. I know the slander of people who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put you, some of you, in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Again, this 10 days is, subjective. It's like John is thinking that these things, all these things will come to an end in his lifetime. Jesus is coming back soon, as we read that yesterday. Well, 10 days could be God's version of 10 days. It could be 10,000 years, or it could be 10 years. It could be it could be 1,000 years, or whatsoever. We cannot understand this until when Jesus comes, we can ask him about this. He said, be faithful even to the point of death, that I will give you the crown of life. The crown of life was a coincidence. The city was known as the crown of Smyrna. The crown of Smyrna is where all the temples are. He who has an ear, let him hear what the churches says to the church, what the Spirit has to say to the churches. He who overcomes will not be hurt at all by the second death. Second death is like, hey, this is the first and the last, and he's, yeah. And so he was mentioning about the coming, the second coming, and all that. You will not die when, as he mentioned, there's this second death that's to come, that you die first, and then there's a judgment that comes. So the three encouragement for the church in three encouragement to this discouraged church. They were heavily persecuted. Firstly, John told them that God knows what's going on, and John told them not to be afraid. And obviously, in this letter to them, it was told to them to be faithful. Now, let's look into this. God knows. He says, I know your affliction and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know about the slander of those who say they are Jews and they are not, but are synagogue of Satan. He said, I know. God told through John, I know what's going on. I know your affliction. For those who are going through struggles today, God knows what you are going through. God knows about the slander, people who are saying nasty things about you, saying untrue things about you. God says he knows what is going on. You see, Psalms 37 tells us that the Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in him. So the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. And though he stumble, he will not fall, for the Lord upholds him with his hand. So if we stay faithful, if we stay right, and we found favor in God, we may fall, we may go through struggles, but we will not fall, in the sense that because God upholds us in his hands. Now, God knows their affliction and their financial struggle. They were not allowed to trade unless they had the mark of the beast. As we mentioned, what the mark of the beast yesterday was. If you missed that lesson, you can go back to the website and watch it. It's still there. And there was smear campaign about the Jews. They tried to find ways to persecute the Christians, and said that these Christians, has communion, and he says, eat my flesh and my blood. They were actually practicing cannibalism, and as a result of them, they were punished, by the Romans, assuming that this smear campaign were true, and they were Jews. They were there who believed but not practicing. And so they were the one who betrayed them. The fellow Jews living in a foreign country were the one who betrayed the Jews who were Christians. As in the world, there are Christians and there are Christians. And I just found this video. It's going to be loud. I just warned you about this prophet. He has a large church, and I may not agree with what he did.
Jesus. You've been there for how long? I'm not in witch. I'm in witch for Jesus. You are what? My own witch is for Jesus. You are a foul devil. Do you know who you're talking to? Foul devil.
I mean, you don't slap a person. I mean, even though you're a pastor of a large church. And he accused her of being a witch for the devil, but she said, I'm a witch for Jesus, I love Jesus. And then he said, do you know who you're talking to? It's as though that he's God, placed in that position. So there are Christians and there are Christians. I'm sorry that I put up this video, but just don't agree with what he does. You can disagree with another person. You don't have to be violent, and you don't have to physically abuse a person in church. And there's another video that you can watch it on the website when you review this, about this man. It's a preacher in the youth service, and he actually slapped the young people. I mean, physically slapped them. If my daughter was slapped by him, I make sure that he go cushion or not. You ought to be showing love. You ought to be knowing that you have self-control in that sense. So John was trying to tell them, hey, God knows what's going on. Be encouraged. You are not alone in this fight. He knows your financial struggle. He says, though you may be poor, but you are actually rich. That sounds strange, but actually they are. I will come to that. He told them not to be afraid. He says that do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Do not be afraid of what you're going to suffer. Last week, 2 weeks ago, I think I did a study on the book of James. He talked about consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. So you don't be afraid when you are going through problems. And so James now says, basically in life you will face many trials, and trials will bring us down. That's obvious. But when we perceive trials from the perspective of victimized mindset, that we are a victim towards this, and why me? Why am I struggling all the time? Why am I having problems and all that? Then it will cause us to react negatively towards others and ourselves, and then this can result in bitterness and envy and aggression and all that. But he says that you need to look at your trials from the testing perspective. It's not you being victimized. It's a test. Because if your faith cannot be tested, then you cannot be trusted. I like what Nelson Mandela said, I never lose, I only learn. So he went through testing experiences. He says, every test I go through, I never lose. I have never lost. I only learn. So we take trials as a learning experience, but we take trials as learning experience. For instance, you're going to pass your medical exam as to become a doctor. You have to go through the hours that you had to spend studying and doing your homework. Those were trials. But but you know that when you finish those trials, you qualify as a medical doctor. That's why it actually results in perseverance. Perseverance results in maturity, because you now become more mature in handling your crisis, and then become wiser as a result of this. Then you have a life up there. Now, every new level that you grow into, um, every new level, there's a new devil to encounter. So this process, you will continue to have trials, and the trials will grow you from glory to glory. Now, assuming that there is no test, this is a norm. When there's no test, then we will be stagnant. No trial, no change. But when we are being tested, we take it from a negative perspective, then we are on the destructive path. We become weaker, we become ignorant. But when we take it from that growth perspective, that I can grow with this, then I am no longer where I was, I'm now here. If this problem ever come back to me, I am better now because I can solve this problem. So if I continue to grow, when I arrive here, this is my new norm. My new norm makes me to be stronger and wiser. The old problem no longer a problem. Then when I grow again, this is my newer norm. My newer norm will make me to become stronger and wiser. If we keep growing, then we become stronger and wiser, and keep growing stronger and wiser. So this is why John was telling them, don't be afraid. You will grow. You will be rewarded with the crown of life. So when you face trials, look at it from the testing perspective, not from a victimized mindset. So live your life well. He says, be ready for problems, be prepared for them, but be wise in handling them. So essentially, he's telling them, fear not. And then he encouraged them to be faithful in their faith. It says, be faithful into even to the point of death. I will give you the crown of life. It's very interesting about what's going on there. This is Pastor Polycarp. Polycarp was installed as a pastor, according to some commentators, by John. And he's the pastor of the church in Smyrna. He faced trials for his faith in Jesus. He was told to deny Jesus, or he and the church will be persecuted and he will be killed. He refused. He refused to deny Christ because this is what he said, as recorded in the history. He says, 86 years have I served Christ, nor has he ever done me any harm. How then could I blaspheme my King who saved me? I bless thee for deeming me worthy of this day and this hour, that I may be among thy martyrs and drink the cup of my Lord Jesus Christ. He refused, he went through that, and they actually burned him alive. So while they were putting him in the fire, the historian said that the people around him who was witnessing this saw another figure in the fire. And as a result of this, there was sympathies for Christians. And sympathy for Christians began to rise in the city. Many turned to believing Jesus. Actually, because of the persecution, the church grew. And it backfired on the Romans, and this man called Polycarp was faithful for 86 years of his life, serving God for 86 years of his life. In fact, his legacy still continues in the city. There's a church in Smyrna today. It's called the Church of Saint Polycarp, and I'll show you the picture of it. Of all the 7 churches, Smyrna had the worst persecution by far. But of all the 7 churches, Smyrna did the best in the long run by far. This is a picture of the city of Smyrna in 1883. The emergence of Smyrna as a major international port by the 17th century was largely a result of the attraction it exercised over foreigners and cities' European orientation. Because it's a port city, it's a major hub, and it became wealthy. It has been one of the principal mercantile cities of the Mediterranean Sea for much of its history. So remember when John wrote, you think you were poor, but actually you were rich. See, God can bless the city. And you can see that in this picture, there is this image of this crown of Smyrna that is there. And today it is then when Alexander the Great came, converted this into a palace, and these are the remnants. It's called Kadifalatskale, I hope I pronounce it correctly, and it's also known as the Velvet Castle in Turkey. In Turkish, it's still there, and this is the view from the crown of Smyrna of the city and into the sea. And it's a beautiful city. It's a wealthy city. They were not poor. And this is another image of the city. You can see the mountains at the backdrop of it. This is church, still going on strong today. Smyrna, which is now known as Izmir, is the 3rd largest city in Turkey. It's regarded as the country's most progressive and dynamic. Izmir today is the most Christianized city of Turkey. Izmir is also the city which helped spread Christianity over all Asia Minor and modern-day Turkey. So the persecution came in hard. They suffered the most among all the 7 cities, but actually they did the best among all the other cities. Don't give up, and because God is not through with us yet. So this is a letter to the discouraged church. It's known as Smyrna. They were by far the worst in terms of persecution, but by far they did the best. And if you're going through discouragement today, don't give up. God knows what you're going through. Do not be afraid. Find the strength of God in you to overcome it. Take every problem as a challenge, as a test, so that you can grow from glory to glory, and you can become wiser and stronger, and wiser and stronger. And keep the faith. Don't give up, because God will eventually reward you with the crown of life in your life. All right, I'll see you tomorrow, and I pray that you enjoy these lessons. This Saturday at 8 a.m., I'm going to do a service, a speak on chaos to order. Should be about 40 minutes time. Speak for 30 minutes or so, and we're going to join by people from all over the world, from America, from China, from Indonesia, as well as Malaysia and Singapore and Cambodia. So if you can join me, if you want to join me, log on. The information are there. If you need forward this info to all your friends to come and join us. Well, they're most welcome. The world is in chaos now. And then how, as Christians, and how can we then put it back in order? How can we turn our mess into a message? God bless you. See you all tomorrow. Thank you.